that show she is incapable of working impartially on sensitive matters within the National Security Division, particularly on the Durham investigation. For example, December 1st, 2020, Ms. Hennessy stated, and I am quoting, "Durham has made abundantly clear that in a year and a half, he hasn't come up with anything. I guess this kind of partisan silliness has become characteristic of Barr's legacy, but unclear to me why Durham would want to go along with it," end quote. So how can the American people be certain that she is going to be fair and impartial when she is on the record making those statements? So has she retracted that statement? And do you intend to ask her to retract that statement?
I have to confess, I don't think I've even ever met Miss Hennessy, and she has nothing whatsoever to do with it.
Well, you may want to look at her. She is there in your National Security Division, and she is very much opposed to this. I want to thank you for your time. I am going to send a couple of questions to you for more complete answers, but I associate myself with the comments by my colleagues that the border issues have turned every town into a border town and every state into a border state. The amount of drugs, the amount of trafficking that is flowing in here, talking to local law enforcement, the way they're looking at the cartels. Mr. Attorney General, there is a lot that needs to be done to secure this country, and the parents of the kiddos in our school, they are not the problem. There are other problems that need your attention.
This is an oversight hearing of the Justice Department with Attorney General Merrick Garland testifying. We now continue with Senator Dick Durbin. He is the Judiciary Committee Chair. He's a Democrat of Illinois.
Senator Hawley.
Mr. Chairman, did you call up me or Senator Ossoff?
I'm sorry.
I'm happy to go.
I didn't see Senator Ossoff. I apologize. Senator Ossoff, then Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Senator Hawley. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Attorney General, nice to see you. Thanks for joining us. Last week, the Senate passed legislation that I introduced alongside Chair Durbin and Ranking Member Grassley, the Prison Camera Reform Act, to reduce violence and civil rights abuses in BOP facilities by overhauling a security camera system that IG Horowitz has found is outdated, unreliable, as well as the means of preserving and recording the footage from those systems. Do you agree that these reforms are necessary, and should this bill become law, will you commit to prioritizing the implementation of the requirements it imposes upon the BOP?
Yes, and yes.
Thank you, Attorney General. I'd like to discuss with you staffing issues at the Bureau of Prisons. Earlier this year, the GAO, which as you know is a nonpartisan independent watchdog, concluded that BOP lacks a reliable method for assessing the scope of staffing issues or the impact on incarcerated populations and staff of staffing issues at BOP facilities. Do you agree the inability to reliably measure this problem impedes BOP's ability to address gaps? For example, shortages of medical staff, shortages of personnel who will help implement the First Step Act and anti-recidivism programs, as well as makes it more difficult for Congress to respond. And will you commit to working with my office to help identify where there's gaps in planning or budgeting or personnel management or the authorities that BOP has?
Yes, Senator. I met with the Comptroller General about this, about the various of his reports, and this one in particular. And I agree this is a serious problem at the Bureau of Prisons. The Deputy Attorney General has been working on this problem for quite some time now, as she has repeat meetings with the Bureau of Prisons to go over this issue with respect to staffing and assessment. And I'd be happy to have somebody on our staff meet with your staff.
Thank you, Attorney General. The Inspector General has determined that BOP lacks a clear and consistent policy for the use of solitary confinement in BOP facilities. Has BOP, to your knowledge, issued such a policy?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, will you work with my office to determine whether they have and what may need to be done to ensure that they do?
Of course.
Thank you, Attorney General. Question about commercial data and its use in DOJ investigations. In 2018, the Supreme Court issued its Carpenter versus United States decision that government agents must obtain a warrant before collecting cell phone data to show the location of a device over a 7-day period. Of course, this data is widely available for many U.S. persons on commercial markets through data brokers and other technology companies. To your knowledge, do any federal agencies currently purchase data, or any DOJ components currently purchase data or contract for services that provide device location data from commercial vendors? Is this data used in investigations or prosecutions?
I don't believe that we purchase location data, but I'll be happy to look into that and get back to that, back to you on that as well.
I'd be grateful because I think there are serious Fourth Amendment concerns there. Would like to discuss the FISA process with you. In its report last month, the Office of the Inspector General noted that DOJ and FBI still had work to do to implement the IG's recommendations to strengthen the review process for FISA applications to ensure they contain accurate information. And while this has unfortunately become a partisan issue over the last few years, it's fundamentally an issue of privacy, due process, and the integrity of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court and the applications it receives. The IG's report notes that the FBI has not significantly changed the process by which a supervisor, such as the Assistant Attorney General for National Security Division, reviews and documents the factual assertions made in FISA applications. And I discussed this issue with Matt Olson when he was before the committee for his confirmation. So what steps is the DOJ taking to make substantive changes to the FISA review process and comport with the IG's recommendations?
So I completely agree that this should not be a partisan issue. FISA, on the one hand, is an extraordinarily important tool for our ability to protect the country against foreign enemies. And on the other hand, it's a tool that has to be dealt with the most extreme care because we have to protect American citizens from unwarranted surveillance, non-judicial surveillance. I take the Inspector General's report extraordinarily seriously. I believe the one you're talking about, though, refers back to events from 2020 and 2019. But regardless, we take this very seriously, and the FBI director does as well. The National Security Division of the department reviews what the FBI is doing with respect to FISAs routinely, audits and analyzes them to be sure that they are following the correct rules. And we intend to continue that kind of intensive review to ensure that the internal regulations and the requirements of the FISC are maintained.
Attorney General Merrick Garland responding to Senator John Ossoff, Democrat of Georgia.
Thank you. Thank you, Attorney General. And I believe there is, within the last couple of months, some additional recommendations or concerns expressed by the IG about the implementation of changes pursuant to his prior conclusions. So
this must be the Woods. I think this is the Woods files that you're talking about. And again, I quite
that's correct.
I quite agree that this has to be done better. That, as I think he said, it's a work in progress. There is certainly considerably more room for improvement, and we are focused on making those improvements.
Okay, well, please know that there's bipartisan concern about seeing those improvements implemented. Final question for you about press freedom. Mr. Attorney General, you issued a memo in July prohibiting the department from using subpoenas, court orders, or warrants to obtain information on the confidential sources of reporters. And this new policy, as you defined it, offers broad protections for members of the news media, but does not qualify or define with specificity who qualifies as members of the news media. Is there a specific interpretation of that phrase that's been issued in internal department guidance?
So the answer to that is no. We have discussed this with representatives of the news media continuously, and as part of our review for purposes of turning this memorandum into a regulation, we are continuing to discuss this. As you can imagine, it's very difficult to make that kind of definition.
But very important to get it right.
I completely agree.
And I think my staff will likely ask yours for a briefing on the progress of your deliberations, and perhaps we'll weigh in. Thank you for your service, Attorney General, and for your responses, and I yield back.
Thanks, Senator Ossoff. Senator Hawley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Attorney General Garland, on October 4th, you issued an unprecedented memo that involves the Department of Justice and the FBI and local school districts, local school boards. Nothing like it in our country's history. It was based, you've testified, on this letter from the National School Board Association that we now know the White House was involved in writing. They've retracted the letter. They've apologized for the letter. They say they regret the letter, but you won't retract the memo and said earlier that you have no regrets. And you've defended yourself repeatedly today before this committee by saying, well, you're focused on violence. But now, of course, we've seen the memo from your own Justice Department advising state and local and other prosecutors about all of the different federal causes of action that they can bring against parents that are not about violence, they're about harassment and intimidation. I'm looking here at this memo. It identifies